You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt Show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. We're talking with Anne Hornig-Sukup, who is the finance director of American Citizens Abroad, which is an advocacy group based in Geneva, Switzerland. Perhaps you heard the previous interview with one of the directors there, Mary Louise Serrato. If you missed that interview, you should definitely download it at YouTube. Look up Goldstein on Gelt and you'll find that interview, or simply go to goldsteinongelt.com. Anne, it's a pleasure to have you.
Hi, Doug. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
So the ACA, the American Citizens Abroad, was founded in Geneva in 1978. Tell us a little bit about what the organization does.
ACA was founded in 78 because some Americans living overseas, particularly in Switzerland, discovered that their children would not be American citizens. So the original idea of just getting citizenship for children born overseas kind of morphed into lots of other issues involving Americans overseas, including taxation, of course, Social Security and Medicare, and other issues that are important to Americans as soon as they live outside of the United States.
So it's funny you bring up the point of getting citizenship for your children, because, of course, now that is a very hot topic for people who want to get out of the system.
Exactly. We were just talking, I just came from an ACA meeting at noon, and we were just talking about how our whole citizenship subject has shifted. Although we still get people who say, how can I get my passport for my children? So it's not entirely negative for the moment to have an American passport, thank heavens.
So other than the American, if someone's really going to live outside the United States, and in fact, I see this, by the way, in Israel also, there are people who the grandparents moved to Israel, and the children who are now grown-ups really only speak Hebrew, and though their children are, they feel like they're total Israelis, but the grandparents still get them American citizenship. What happens to these kids?
It's an interesting question because some people are U.S. persons, as it's just defined under American law. Some people are U.S. persons, even though they don't think they are. If they were not born in the States, if their parents, as you say, children of grandparents perhaps, or children of parents who could have passed on citizenship but didn't, and the child never got an American passport, we've had several cases in ACA where someone applied for a work visa in the United States. They got a great job in New York or Chicago. So they applied for a visa. When you apply for a visa, you get a long questionnaire to fill out on where your parents were born, where they've lived, etc. And in certain cases, the U.S. government says, we won't give you a visa because you are American. So apply for a passport instead. And that's a shock because then you have to get into compliance with your taxes.
I see. And are these people able to get the job that they're coming to America for?
Some people have given it up because getting into tax compliance was too onerous. So it's a good point. There are some people who just give up the possibility. It's just too complicated and too expensive sometimes to get back into compliance with U.S. taxes.
You're using the term compliance, which I think just might be a euphemism for not being a criminal. Let's just call it spade a spade. Is that what we're talking about?
That's exactly what we're talking about. The current U.S. taxation system is based on citizenship. So every American citizen and every U.S. person, as I said, who is eligible to be an American is supposed to be declaring all their bank accounts and all their income to the United States every year. Now, there are an approximate 4 to 7 million people all over the world. I don't know how many American citizens live in Israel, but very, very many. And many of them never knew that they had to declare taxes to the United States. Or if they don't owe taxes to the United States, they still have to declare their bank accounts, foreign bank accounts. So when I say get into compliance, sometimes it doesn't mean that you have to pay taxes, but you have to prove to them that you don't owe them. You have to declare a tax declaration to the United States.
So why might someone not owe taxes to the U.S. if he's a U.S. citizen?
There's an earned income exclusion, which is approximately, I'm not a tax preparer, but it's approximately $92,000. And if you earn under that amount, then you don't owe taxes to the United States. There's also a tax credit where you live. So whatever you pay in Israeli taxes living in Israel will be credited, against what you owe to the United States. So they don't necessarily owe anything, but they're a criminal if they haven't declared something.
Thank you. Now you're beginning to talk straight with us. All right, so let's get into the really juicy stuff now.
Right,
which
exactly. Let's be blunt here.
Let's say that a guy left America 30 years ago, grew up in Chicago, and moved to Switzerland and got a nice job, for example, as a wealth manager there. And lived in Switzerland, doesn't really do much outside of Switzerland, and opens a local bank account and buys a couple of mutual funds through a local brokerage firm, and really has no connection with the U.S. What's the problem here?
This is the case for millions of people overseas who don't consider that they have any obligation to the United States because no one else has an obligation to their home country if they live outside of that country. The United States is the only country that taxes on the basis of citizenship. The problem is two laws, one of which is an old law which has existed for decades but has never been enforced, and now it is. It's called FBAR, which is the Foreign Bank Account Report. And the second is a new law passed in 2010, gradually being put into effect, which is called FATCA. You can see how the U.S. legislators think of us overseas. We're all fat cats. But anyhow, the FATCA requires banks overseas to declare directly to the IRS which of their accounts belong to U.S. persons. So your example of someone living in Switzerland or someone living in Israel or someone living in Singapore, it doesn't matter where they live. The banks in the coming 2 or 3 years will have to put into effect a system which identifies American citizens or people who might be American citizens. And that information will be transmitted to the U.S. government. So it's been the case that someone in your example or someone living in Jerusalem could be under the radar, not know they had to declare, not owe anything, no penalties, no fines, no criminal, because they don't owe anything and they never knew they had to declare. But right now, the law is changing and enforcement of the law is changing, and it will become over the next few years almost impossible to keep your head down and not declare to the United States.
We are talking with Anne Hornig-Sukup, who is the finance director of American Citizens Abroad, which is a group based in Switzerland that helps American citizens who live outside the United States. And you brought up a very interesting point. I just think it's so new in the world, which is that the non-U.S. banks are going to have to report to the IRS who their U.S. citizens who their clients are who are U.S. citizens. So let's just paint the picture. Let's say that there is a big bank in Singapore, and it has nothing to do with the United States. It's a local bank in Singapore. How is it that they have to follow the laws that are written on the other side of the globe?
The words imperialistic overreach come to mind. Okay. However, I've
heard America accused of that.
Could be. Comes up from time to time. The U.S. Congress, in all their wisdom, decided that they weren't getting the tax cheats out of the woodwork, and the way to get the tax cheats out of the woodwork would be to go after the banks. Now, as you say, a bank in Singapore that has nothing to do with the United States, they could say, I refuse to provide information. In certain countries, many countries around the world, it's forbidden to provide privacy information such as client names to a foreign government. But the way the United States, the stick, I'm not sure there's much of a carrot, but the stick in the FATCA system is that any bank that does not comply, that chooses not to comply and not to sign up directly with the IRS and provide information on U.S. clients, or at least prove they have no U.S. clients, that bank will be taxed 30% of any U.S. transaction, meaning one share of IBM bought or sold, or one U.S. bond bought or sold. 30% of the transaction, not of the capital gain, but 30% of the transaction will be withheld by the United States because that institution has not signed up with the United States, with the IRS. That's the stick.
That is the stick. So the United States, just knowing that it is the biggest economy out there, said if you want to play in our ballpark, you have to play 100% by our rules.
Exactly.
So a lot of clients own offshore mutual funds, which is the generic term, and it's actually interesting because we're talking internationally, offshore of what shore? But let's talk about what I consider the standard definition, which is you have American mutual funds that are meant for Americans, and then there's anything off the shores of the United States. Oftentimes these companies are registered in Switzerland or in the Bahamas or the Cayman Islands. Are American citizens allowed to own these funds?
They're allowed to own them, but I know tax preparers in Switzerland who say if you own offshore, meaning non-American mutual funds of any kind, I will not do your taxes. It is so complex. They're allowed to, in some cases they're not allowed to, because it does say in the prospectus this is not approved for Americans. But an ETF, for example, that's listed in France, an American can buy it. It's just the tax preparers find it almost impossible to prepare taxes. Part of the burden of this citizenship-based taxation is the incredible complication it creates for Americans living outside of the United States. Taxation in the United States is not easy to start with, but overseas we have thousands and thousands and thousands more pages to assimilate, to understand, and we're considered, let's get back to the word criminal, we're considered criminal if we make a mistake. If we make an honest mistake and we underreport this or we don't report that because we honestly didn't know we had to, that's considered under the U.S. System, it's considered a criminal act. So I don't want to scare your listeners, but it's a little bit of a scary situation. And Americans overseas are in a panic, I must admit. People who have not complied, who have not declared to the United States for many years because they never thought that they had to, they're scared now. They're definitely scared because there have been programs that have imposed very hefty penalties, fines, etc., just for not declaring, not on back taxes, wow, just for not declaring. So it's a little bit of a scary situation how it's being applied right now.
Listen, I think it's fine that you say on the air that it is a scary situation, because I think it's important to shake people up. You know, my day job is that I'm a financial advisor in Jerusalem. I tend to work mostly with Americans who have moved to Israel, and that's kind of the special niche market. But I have to say, I see all the time, certainly in the past couple of years, people say, Doug, I met with my tax attorney or I met with my accountant, and we're cleaning up our act, and it's costing us a huge amount of money.
People are in a panic. There are people who say, I should just end it all. And I don't want to be flippant about suicide, but frankly, we've had several exchanges with people who said, I don't see any way out.
Oh my God.
A foreign American citizen married to a non-American citizen living overseas, when the fine or the penalty becomes so big that the non-American spouse, whether it's a man or a woman, has to kick in and sell assets and, come up with a hefty fine. Oftentimes this person says, look, I'm just not interested in being a spouse of an American anymore. I mean, it goes very, very far. And I really am not being flippant. It goes very far, and it is a scary situation.
Well, that'll be really something when those international matchmakers, you read about them when you're flying and they have advertisements on the airplane. They'll say, we specialize in matching you with someone who is not a U.S. citizen. Exactly. And that'll be considered an asset.
We promise they have no hidden U.S. passport. It's a crazy world when what used to be a huge asset, having an American passport, used to be a great attraction. It used to be confidence. It used to be something people were proud of. And now it's something that people are unfortunately trying to get rid of. Renunciations are jumping into the thousands of cases a year. And it's something that people are, I don't want to say embarrassed, but people are upset about having because of these laws that are so extraterritorial and unfair.
Wow. We have been talking with Anne Hornig-Sukup, who's the finance director of American Citizens Abroad. First off, Anne, this has been very interesting. For those of you who are listening who like the topic, be sure to download the interview that I did with Mary Louise Serrato, who is also a director of ACA. You can get that at YouTube. Just look up Goldstein on Gelt, or simply go to goldsteinongelt.com and check out that interview. Anne, we're just about out of time, but do me a favor. Tell me, how can people follow the work that you're doing?
Well, ACA, we consider ourselves, and we are considered now in a lot of the press and in Washington, the voice of Americans overseas. So I would encourage anyone, any listener who is interested in these issues to go to our website, which is www.americansabroad.org. They can look up information on all kinds of subjects. We will direct them to specialists. We will help however we can to direct them to people in Washington. We can tell them who to write to. We can tell them all kinds of ways that they can react on this. But certainly become a member of ACA, support what we're doing. We are the voice of Americans overseas, and we'd like to help.
Great. And thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Doug.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.